Well, to talk to us about the BC campaign, we're now joined by Mo Amir, host of This is Vancolour. Mo, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I actually thought that this was the serious politics outlet, so I'm a little surprised that you asked me to be here, but honored nonetheless.
No, you're serious. You're serious. You're in good company here. Listen, let's talk about this campaign, because, a few months ago, people were talking about, or at least predicting what would be an easy re-election for David Eby and the NDP, but that's not the talk right now, thanks in large part to BC United and the leader's decision to suspend that party's campaign. So was Eby just benefiting from a vote split this spring, or was there discontent that the numbers weren't showing?
I can understand that from the outside it looked like there was a vote split, but I don't think that that's necessarily accurate. It was more like a small snake slowly but eventually swallowing a much larger, slower, defenseless snake. What was happening was that the BC Conservatives were this dormant party that were suddenly revived with a new organization and a new leader in John Rustad, and they were, over time, but relatively quickly, taking away the free enterprise coalition voter base. And not only the voter base, they were taking away MLAs, they were taking away organizers. And so what was left of BC United, they were basically down to single digits in the polls. And I think if they had continued and not suspended their campaign, I think it would have been even worse. And at that point, I don't think there would have been much of a vote split. Some of the remaining BC United supporters have already talked about supporting the BC NDP, or perhaps not even voting at all. In terms of Premier Eby kind of enjoying a vote split, I think obviously in the polls you had seen a bit of that as this shift was happening. But at the same time, Premier Eby has still maintained a high level of popularity. He has high favorability numbers. The BC NDP's popularity in general has been hovering around 40%. There's maybe some changes here and there, but ultimately it's not like we've seen a collapse of his support.
Not seeing a collapse. In fact, and we know that because there is reference already to the fact that this is going to be a very tight campaign right to the very end. But, it was interesting to see John Rustad, the leader of the Conservatives, open the campaign this weekend at Crab Park in Vancouver. That's near a homelessness encampment for people who don't know. So it makes me wonder, how big of an issue will homelessness be in this campaign, and what Rustad seemed to be tying it to safe injection sites and illegal drug supply?
Yeah, great question, and really an interesting choice for Mr. Rustad to officially launch his campaign when we think about Crab Park. I thought that he was going to announce some sort of homelessness strategy, because the reality is that while Mr. Rustad points to homelessness as a large issue, he hasn't really outlined what he wants to do. In fact, his party has been against a lot of supportive housing projects, which include wraparound services, which include things like avenues to treatment. So it's not really clear exactly what he wants to do with the homelessness crisis. Now, with regard to Mr. Rustad tying homelessness with safe injection sites or safe consumption sites, this is kind of what we're seeing throughout the country nationally, referring to these sites like Insight, like safe consumption sites, like safe inhalation sites as drug dens. And you're probably more aware that that's what federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has been calling them. But I think the reality is that British Columbia, and Vancouver in particular, has a long history of these type of sites. I do think that British Columbians recognize that these sites help stop the spread of disease, certainly things like hepatitis C and HIV. They stop other health complications that can be had when you're using dirty supplies. And then when we think about the toxic drugs crisis, it's not necessarily safe supply that's killing people, it is the toxic drug supply. And so I think that British Columbians on one hand do recognize that, but on the other hand, we have seen homelessness grow throughout the province, not just in Vancouver, Victoria, and Kelowna, but in other regions that maybe didn't have these issues. And I think that there is a segment of the population that is very fatigued with this issue. They don't see much progress, and certainly the numbers show that when you look at the homelessness count that has gone up provincially. And so I do think that there is a segment of the population that really just wants to have it out of sight and out of mind, and they're not really that concerned about what the solutions end up being.
Okay, well,
so you have...
Go ahead, Mo.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, so you have a provincial BC Conservative Party that is effectively tapping into that fatigue and that frustration.
Fatigue, frustration, and from the NDP side, we've also seen something interesting because a number of their people are talking about certain individuals who are running for the Conservatives, describing them as anti-abortion, anti-science, homophobic, weird, bigoted. Can those descriptions sway voters?
Well, as I wrote in the Tyee recently, John Rustad is a climate change denier. He will say that climate change is real, but what he's referring to are the long-term patterns of climate change. He has openly said that human activity is not the primary driver of climate change, which is the scientific consensus. And so I think they have a lot on John Rustad and the Conservatives, because they have a lot of candidates that have said some interesting, weird, perhaps offensive things, and they're certainly drawing on that. Even, in fact, today there was a video that the BC NDP released of Mr. Rustad, calling the COVID-19 vaccines the so-called vaccine and making some sort of reference to it being something to use to control the population. And I guess in the end, this is really going to be a test for British Columbians in terms of how much of these, let's just call them fringe or just out of the mainstream ideas, will they be able to tolerate? Or will British Columbians effectively accept imperfect authenticity? Because that's what the BC Conservatives are saying. They're saying, yeah, you know what, we have some candidates and perhaps even our leader that didn't really have big ambitions to become a politician. But this is real life. People say things, people have kooky beliefs, but we want to get together and we want to bring you solutions. And so this is what that test is going to be. But certainly in terms of its effectiveness, I think that John Rustad has a big gap with women, and that's showing out in the polls. Women that may be worried about losing access to free contraception, or may worry that that their reproductive rights are at risk, and that's certainly something that the BC NDP are hammering on.
Well, we are watching from here in Ottawa, Mo. You and I hopefully will get a chance to speak again, but for this evening, thank you for that.
Thank you so much.